I still love Magic, and it's, probably the most formative thing in my entire life. It's the reason that I have the kind of jobs that I've had throughout my life. I feel like it was a mistake for Wizards to upend as much history and tradition as they had with the Pro Tour and kind of try to reinvent the wheel, essentially. The Magic Pro Tour was the longest ongoing competitive gaming circuit that I'm aware of ever. In sort of the esports-ish gaming world, Magic was kind of the first real pro gaming scene that had a level of legitimacy. And I feel like the desire to become esports or whatever and shift over to being a more broadcast focused product, and rebrand things to Mythic Championships or whatever, I feel like was just an error. People didn't care that much about watching the best players play. People cared about watching the best players play, but they cared more about the chance of playing against them or seeing their friends play against them. The aspirational part of it, there will be. Ellie's not happy about the Pro Tour, apparently. She's
Welcome to Humans of Magic. My guest this week is none other than Brian Kibler. Brian is a Magic Hall of Famer, pro gamer, game designer, and broadcaster. Needless to say, this is one of the biggest names I've had in the podcast, and you'll have to forgive me. The first half hour, I was just extremely nervous talking to Brian, and it certainly showed in recording. It gets a little bit better later on. Nerves aside, I had a great conversation with Brian. Certainly a Magic celebrity in every sense of the word. I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Just coming off a pretty long stream, but I love doing that, so still feeling pretty energized.
I think I saw your tweet. You're doing some fun stuff on your Hearthstone stream, right? You made some big things happen.
Yeah. I much like when I was competing in Magic, I typically try to find different sort of ways to mess around and try and find wins against popular decks while playing what it is that I want. So.
I still find it super remarkable how I think I saw your VOD, you streamed for 7 hours today. And I know you said you don't look at concurrent viewer counts, but I was looking at it while you were live. And you had 1,700 or 1,800 viewers towards the end. Is that just every day in the life of Brian streaming now or what?
No, that's actually a pretty good number for me these days. The viewership on Twitch is a weird thing, because, especially someone like me who primarily streams, a game or a couple of different games, a lot of sort of your viewership is going to go with sort of the ebbs and flows of the popularity of the game or game mode that you're playing. A few years ago, I would average 3,000 or 4,000 viewers. But, with sort of the decline in, popularity of just Hearthstone generally on Twitch, pretty much everyone, streaming constructed Hearthstone has seen pretty similar levels of drop off in viewership, but I still love to do it, and today was a good day. So
there's definitely ebbs and flows with the game. So what happened with Hearthstone to make it? Because you mentioned having 3,000 viewers a while back. What happened? The game itself, or the formats you play, or what was it? Or what is it?
There's a number of factors, and obviously, none of these can really be super deterministic, my knowledge of what the actual, factors are. But my theory is the viewership of specifically constructed Hearthstone on Twitch has, dropped for a few reasons. One, it's just an older game now. It had huge spikes in viewership early on, where it was this hot thing. Tons of people were into it because it was new and exciting, and then kind of had more peaks when really popular thematic sets came out, like Knights of the Frozen Throne. Lots of people really into the Lich King and stuff, so you had another sort of bump there. But over time, as people aren't really playing it as much because they're moving on to other games, whether it's other card games or things like Overwatch 2 or Valorant, both of which are pretty hot right now. Or just, they've just moved on to watching other game modes of Hearthstone. Hearthstone Battlegrounds has kind of cannibalized both, I think, viewership of Hearthstone Constructed, as well as a lot of the popular streamers of, other Hearthstone game modes. So you have sort of this shift in viewership coming from a bunch of different directions. And I think also notably, their esports program is on YouTube rather than Twitch now. And you can actually see like kind of a direct correlation in the overall Hearthstone constructed viewership since they made that shift. And, you know, with no like big, exciting, like tentpole championship type events, I think you have like fewer kind of casual viewers who tune in to kind of get the sense of things before those big events.
That all adds up. That all matters. Yeah, for sure. And this might be like, I might be starting off with quite a controversial question here, but how firm or convicted are you in terms of staying on with Hearthstone? Because I know you've done, like, you branched off into other types of streams recently as well. Like, is Hearthstone just like a mainstay for you because you've done it for a decade, or how do you feel about that?
So there's a couple factors. One, the majority of my at least current viewership on both Twitch and on YouTube are interested in watching me play Hearthstone, right? Like if I stream, say, Magic, I get fewer viewers than if I stream Hearthstone. If I upload Magic videos to my YouTube channel, I get fewer viewers on those than if I'm uploading Hearthstone. And you know, it's not like, you know, I know that there are some people who are like, I hate this game that I stream, but it's the thing that people want to watch me stream, so I keep streaming it. That's not the situation I'm in at all, right? I still very much enjoy the game. And every now and then I'm like, yeah, I want to take some time off and play other stuff, and I do that. When I like really am feeling burnt out, whether it's a particular metagame I don't like, or just there's something else I'm really excited about, I will sort of make time to play other things, stream other things. But that can have significant impacts on, you know, my future viewership, particularly on YouTube, because, you know, you sort of have like the recommendation algorithm that, like, you know, compounds on itself when you go away from what your audience is typically wanting to see. And when you have like a long period of that, you end up having like your viewership for the next one gets, you know, drops, which means your next one gets recommended fewer times, which means your next one drops even more, and so on and so forth. So, you know, I still very much enjoy playing and streaming Hearthstone, but, you know, I don't really feel like I said, I don't really think I'm stuck, but it's not like something that I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get away from it.
That makes sense. I mean, it's the algorithm is definitely one part of it, right? And it just speaks to like how no matter how big your platform is, and I think you have quite a sizable platform, that still is a consideration, right? We're not talking about someone who you know, has 100 viewers on Twitch. Like you have quite a lot of viewers, and everything matters, right? I guess it's all related also to making a living and your brand and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I still very much enjoy Magic and doing, you know, occasional Magic content, playing Magic. But Magic like isn't as successful, at least on Twitch, compared to Hearthstone. I actually specifically enjoy streaming Hearthstone more than I enjoy streaming Magic most of the time. You know, particularly like even with you know, obviously before it was like Magic Online when I first started streaming, because I first started streaming Magic Online, you know, back in like 2011 when, you know, I did my first streams. It was Magic Online, right? There wasn't Hearthstone then. And obviously Magic Online has, you know, a lot of flaws when it comes to streaming, and that's a big part of the reason that they eventually made Magic Arena. But I still think that for me and my mentality approaching games, I generally enjoy streaming Hearthstone more than I enjoy streaming Magic, in part because I still have some of the like competitive brain wiring from my days competing in Magic. Yeah. That like, you know, I don't want to just try and play some like weird deck to try and do wacky things, which I really enjoy doing in Hearthstone. And I also think that the game itself doesn't lend itself as well to stuff like that, right? Like some of my favorite decks in Hearthstone specifically try to do like very different things every single game because of stuff that like creates cards from outside the game and stuff. And obviously Magic tried to lean into that to some degree with Alchemy, but I think Alchemy is mostly awful.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do it in like a satisfying way. It just does it in a really complicated and confusing way.
Right. I got to do full disclosure here. Like, I'm not a Hearthstone player, but I still remember like when Hearthstone came out, there was a reason why Hearthstone is and continues to be probably one of the best digital CCGs, right? Like, it's just built for for digital, right? Like there's a random number generator. Actually, two things you mentioned. I think you mentioned in another interview that when you play Magic, your primal instincts, I think I'm actually quoting you, your primal instincts kick in, and so you want to be more competitive just because of the game being Magic, and maybe it like reawakens something about your competitive side. But also, like you mentioned how like in game design, it's really good to have games that are like casual and fun, and it's not entirely deterministic. And it sounds like maybe I'm reading too much into your answer, but like Hearthstone is also hitting those checking those boxes, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my relationship with Magic for the vast majority of my life was I'm trying to be the best, right? Like I am trying to win. And, like regardless of the fact that I'm now, 7 years removed from when I was last competing regularly, basically when I started streaming full time, there's still that part of my brain that's like, yeah, this is what you tried to do from like age of 15 onward, right? So it's difficult to turn off, at least when I'm playing the game. And like I find the like at least digitally, with like what's available on like Arena and such, like trying to build those wacky decks less compelling, like I said, than I do in something like Hearthstone. I think part of that being the sort of competitive brainworms or whatever that I'm infested with since I was a child. But I also think from the perspective of, as you mentioned, being designed specifically for digital, Hearthstone has a big advantage there, in that like every card was, is always designed for digital, right? Like obviously Magic is trying to do this with Alchemy, as I mentioned, not a big fan, but like even outside of what they're trying to do with that, you still have to come from the baseline that every single card was designed to be a paper card. And, like the elements of the game that aren't necessarily designed digitally, like even just like lands being in play. Right, like lands in Magic take a bunch of like space on the board, right? Obviously, like in Arena, they like try and stack them in certain ways, but that can get confusing when they're stacked in certain ways. And like, you're like, oh, I didn't realize you had that creature land or whatever there. Just it adds to the complexity that a game like Hearthstone has a resource system that's divorced from actual cards, has more simplicity that like doesn't take up screen real estate, and can just kind of do its own thing. There's also just the fact that the nature of the interaction system in Magic means that you're like, because even though there's like my turn and then your turn, like with instants and things like that and blocking, you always have to pay attention on your opponent's turn. And one of the things that makes like a game like Hearthstone so great for streaming is that you kind of can take your opponent's turn off and just talk to the chat, right? Like you don't have to make decisions when it's not your turn. You can't make decisions when it's not your turn. There's no decisions to make. So it's almost the perfect streaming game in the sense that like you can talk through what you're doing and take time to like talk to people, which doesn't necessarily detract from your ability to play the game, which if you're trying to win in Magic, it absolutely does, because there's things that you need to do at all points of every turn, potentially.
So having said all that though, how do you feel about your recent forays into EDH Commander? Because like if Magic has this thing of like activating your competitive instincts, how does it feel to actually play Commander EDH? Because at least when I'm watching as a spectator, like some of the videos you've been on, it feels like you're able to shut that part of your brain off, right? So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, and some of that is like the way that I approach like Commander broadly, and like how I build my decks in Commander is specifically to like not make my decks as powerful as I possibly could, because like I've called Commander deck building to be kind of like game design, right? And it's game design in the sense that rather than I'm trying to build a deck that is looking to win each of the games that I play, I'm trying to build a deck that creates an experience for everyone who's involved in the game, right? So the way that I build my Commander decks is that I try to make them do like a wider variety of things. Kind of like I was talking about, one of the things that is appealing to me about Hearthstone is that, you have like this greater variance in gameplay because of random stuff. I'm not necessarily playing random things in my Commander decks, but the fact that they're 100-card singleton decks means that they will play out more differently on a regular basis. And I have some sort of philosophical things that I do during my deck building process to kind of try to emphasize that. Like none of the decks that I play in Commander have basically any form of tutoring, because I would rather draw more different cards and have my games be different than, have like just a bunch of tutors in every deck, and I'm like, I'm going to go look for this, I'm going to go look for this, and the games just play out the same way, right? Like, I think that I want to build my decks to have a wider variety of gameplay experiences and then play the games to win the games, right? Because that part of my brain of like, hey, I'm trying to win is still there, right? And sometimes, I, like, for instance, when I was, guesting on Olivia's show, Elder Dragon Hijinks, there was one time where I was like doing some ridiculous thing, and I was just like, I'm going to do this as ridiculous thing as possible. I played like, what was it? It was Legion Loyalty, all your creatures have Myriad, and then just attack with all my stuff, and then I was like, oh wait, I guess this draws me a card for every one, so I just deck myself. Because I'm not like dialed in and trying to, ensure that I'm doing everything totally optimally, but I'm still like, my goal is still, hey, I'm going to do this powerful thing and try and win the game. It's just not in quite the same level. It's more like the mentality I have to like practicing for a tournament than playing in the tournament. In either case, I'm still trying to win, but there's just a level of focus that's different, right?
So you're actually approaching Commander kind of like as almost like a designer, like you're it's like, or you're creating constraints for yourself up front so that without the tutors, without certain things in the deck, so that it doesn't actually get to a point where you become a hyper-focused, lean, mean killing machine. Or at least that's how I interpret your answer.
Yeah, I mean, like, I want my decks to do cool stuff, right? But I want them to do different cool stuff. And in many cases, I specifically build my decks in such a way that they, have certain like limitations. Like, for instance, I was actually inspired by someone who I played against at the Command Fest in Orlando to make a Tulane deck, but it's a Tulane deck that has Karuga as the companion. So, like, Tulane, it's a super, super powerful commander, but specifically you want to play a bunch of cheap creatures to, like, keep triggering the Tulane's ability. But I'm like, well, what if I can't do that? Because all of my cards have to cost at least 3. So, the deck can still do ridiculous things because Tulane is ridiculously powerful, but it's, like, in my mind, more interesting to, like, make it with this sort of drawback, this limitation, so that, like, it's more of a challenge both in terms of deck building and in terms of gameplay. And I still play the deck to, like, try and do these ridiculous things and win, but it's just harder because I presented myself with, like, an additional hurdle in deck building.
Are you playing Commander mostly for entertainment, to challenge yourself, or something else? So
the biggest thing that draws me to Commander is it's a way that I can play Magic with anyone, right? Like, as someone who has played Magic competitively for most of my life, it isn't fun for me to play Magic with most people if I'm just playing, like, Constructed or I'm playing Draft or whatever. Like, it's not, it's not like a challenge. I mean, not to sound like like an arrogant jerk or something, but, like, for me to, like, show up to the local F&M is not something that's really, like, ever been something I'm super interested in doing, right? Like, because it's just not that interesting. It's not that fun because, like, we're just playing on very different levels. And with Commander, like, I can just play a game with anyone, right? And it can still be fun. It can still be something that, like, me and, someone who literally just started playing Magic a month ago and, like, whatever range of skill levels you can have can still all, like, sit down and have a good time, because it's not just like, hey, my goal is to beat you, to show that I'm better than you. That's not the point, right? The point of Commander, at least in my mind, it's a social experience. It's an opportunity to get together with friends and to enjoy this experience that you are both passionate about. And like I said, I still try and win the games that I play, right? But it's a very different kind of thing than, like, hey, I have my standard deck that I built and tuned to try and win, and you have yours, and it's just like we're going head to head. Like, it is a much more sort of forgiving experience for, like, players of lower skill level or low experience level, because it's not just like 1v1. The number of games I play were, like, I'm basically arch enemy, right? People gang up on me because, either because of my deck or because I'm just me or whatever.
Yeah.
And those games are really satisfying to win too, right? Like, so it's just a matter of, like, giving me a way to enjoy Magic in a context that I haven't been able to since I was, like, 13, right? Like, since I was literally a kid playing with my friends in, like, middle school, because, like, after the point that I started playing competitively, it wasn't fun to play with my friends from middle school or my friends from home or whatever for the most part, right? Like, sure, I'd do like cube drafts or like the occasional like, draft at home or whatever, but it's just like, it's a very, very different sort of experience. And what I love most of all about Magic is like the deck building and like the challenge of like figuring stuff out. And I love that in Commander too. Right, and it's a different kind of figuring something out. It's a matter of, hey, I want to make a deck that does a thing that creates this experience for people, including myself, of course. And oftentimes giving myself like these restrictions and things, and that's still like this compelling challenge for myself. But now one that I can also like include, a wide range of other people in, rather than like aiming to just take it to be like absolutely cutthroat at the highest level of competition.
Is it the multiplayer aspect of Commander that allows that sort of fun to happen, or
I think there's two elements to it. One is the fact that it's multiplayer, right? The fact that it is multiplayer means that there's like kind of fundamental fail safes of like, if a player is like clearly getting ahead, then it's like, hey, you just kind of team up and try and stop that player from winning the game. And there's also just the fact that it isn't fundamentally like a competitive thing in the same way, right? Obviously, there are people who do play like CEDH, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that, because one of the biggest challenges in Commander, of course, is people kind of being on the same wavelength as far as the kind of game they're looking to have. And one of the things that I think that is great about CEDH is like what the level is whatever you can do that's legal in the game, right? Whereas a lot of times you sit down at a table with someone and you're like, oh, this is my deck. It's power level whatever, which is all mostly nonsense. And it's like someone like sits down and like, infinite combo kills the table on like turn 4. It's like, great, we all had a wonderful time, But when you're playing CDH, that's what you're in for. So, I think that like the fact that because it is so like because of the multiplayer element, and because like as long as you have people who are generally kind of on the same wavelength as far as sort of the experience they're looking to have, it's not nearly as cutthroat. It's not nearly as like, punishing to someone who has a weaker deck or is less experienced or whatever. They can still feel like they're participating in the game and get to do cool stuff that they're doing, even if they lose, right? It's more about the experience than about winning. Whereas obviously competing in tournaments, it's like, yeah, my goal is to win.
I'm curious how long you've been exposed to Commander EDH, because like looking into the history of EDH, like it was actually started a very long time ago with Sheldon Menery and people popularizing it. Is that something you ever experienced while you were like in the Pro Tours or like back in the day, even though you were mostly a competitive player, or is it a more recent phenomenon for you?
So I don't know if the dogs are super loud right now, but
I can hear them, but I think it adds to the atmosphere. Just, as long as they're okay. Do you need to take care of them?
Oh, they're fine. They're just
okay.
barking a lot.
They're just literally crying for attention, or what?
But yeah, I mean, I was exposed to EDH Commander whatever like way back when, and it was funny because when I first went to go like actually start building a Commander deck, I had like a stack of cards that I had pulled years ago. They're like, oh, I'm gonna build an EDH deck. I never did. I never got around to it, and part of it was just like I couldn't decide like the sort of thing I wanted to play, and like then it was just like hard to really bring myself to like make something that wasn't just trying to be the most powerful thing possible, and then that sounded boring. It sounded like it was kind of against the spirit of what everyone was doing anyway. So I just stopped, right? But I like literally like 10 plus years ago, I had like this stack of cards that was like various foil versions of like stuff that seemed powerful then, whatever, or seemed cool. The deck that I was like putting together was like a Progenitus deck, just 'cause I wanted to play all the ridiculous, powerful, big things in every color. And this was obviously before there were like a lot of the modern type Commander things there were, because there weren't Commander products yet. But like there was, like I couldn't really bring myself to actually put something together, because it just didn't seem that interesting to me compared to like actually just building decks for tournaments while I was still competing.
So what changed?
The funny thing is, the first time I ever played Commander, I got a text message from Josh Lee Kwai, from Command Zone Game Nights. That was just, hey, do you want to come play Magic with Post Malone? And I was like, you know what? Sure, that sounds fun. And, I ended up going, out to this house in like the Hollywood Hills that Posty was renting, and, playing Commander with a bunch of people. Like, I didn't have my own decks. I borrowed decks. The very first game of Commander that I played was with Jacob Hawk from Cobra Kai and Cholo, who plays Miguel in Cobra Kai, and their buddy, whose name I constantly forget. But but I borrowed one of Jacob's decks, and it was like an Atla Palani deck. And I ended up using Hate Mirage to make a token copy of an Agent of Treachery and then repeatedly populating it. And I was just like, oh, this is great. Just like taking everyone's things. And I'm like, oh boy, this is awesome. And yeah, that was, I played like one more game that night with Posty and some other folks, and, was basically hooked at that point. And I think it was a big part of it was far enough away from me having, been competitive that like those sort of things, even though I was like, yeah, I'm just looking to do this really gross thing of literally stealing everyone's stuff. It was still the sort of thing where it was like, oh, okay, just this cool social environment, hanging out with these people and playing Magic. This can actually be fun for me again.
What was it actually like though to play with the Cobra Kai folks and with Post Malone in the moment?
It was fun, and it was one of the funny things was, like they were excited to meet me, which was this kind of weird surreal thing. Cause like, wow, you're in the Hall of Fame. And I'm just like, yes. And you're on TV and have like, various like, platinum records or whatever. But no, it was a lot of fun. And, it was just like a really chill environment. Like they're all super, super low key, like really fun people. Tons of people have heard all about like, what a like huge Magic fan that Posty is at this point. But like, not only that, he's just like an unbelievably gracious person. Like he, is super excited to play Magic and also just a super, super nice guy. He like would, I saw him like give out his phone number to like a half dozen people who were hanging out that night, and just like, he was just like happy to take pictures with people, happy to just like chill and whatever. And, similarly with the Cobra Kai guys with, Jacob and Cholo, like they were both just like super excited to get a chance to hang out with all these people and play Magic and everything. And it's funny because like, I think people have these ideas of what like the lives of celebrities are like. And frankly, I've had people, have that same kind of mentality about me. About like, it's so strange that you're just like a normal person down to earth. It's like, I'm just a dude who plays games on the internet, right? And it was just an awesome experience to have an opportunity to hang out with people, who are all just really excited to play games and like clearly very, very into Magic.
People are competitive in their respective fields, right? Like they want to be the best at music or acting or whatever it is. Like, does that ever get activated when they play Magic, or are they able to like completely turn it off?
Oh, like in Commander, like Posty, for instance, is like super competitive. Like Posty and like Cassius Marsh are both just like hyper competitive, like playing. I mean, they're like cool and like chill too, but like I think Cassius in particular is someone who
I can kind of like, feel that, like they're kind of joking, but they're trying to win.
From
right?
like football, right? Which is like ultra competitive. Like you've got to be like really, really into it to be able to like have a possible chance of being as successful, in that field as he has been. Like you got to be ultra competitive, right? So like playing, and harnessing your competitive drive in another field like Magic, you're going to have this. I imagine the same kind of like feelings, kind of like boil up that give you that drive in a much more physical and different kind of environment. But like, I played a game with him where like someone like like killed his stuff or like popped off or whatever. He just like got up and walked away, and it's not like it's like a bad thing, but it's like him recognizing, like I'm gonna be mad if I if like I just sit here and stew in this, right? And it's frankly, if anything, I think that like that having that kind of self-awareness of like your own tendencies in that kind of environment is a really really commendable thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I also want to ask, like, because you're in LA, right? Like, do you just run into, and because of who you are, that sounds kind of lofty, but because of who you are, like, do you just run into celebrities and musicians and actors just all the time? Like, if you're just like walking around, do you just like find somebody or?
No, I mean, frankly, like the most I run into, like, you know, various celebrities is going to play Magic at these sort of events that I'm talking about, right? Like,
yeah.
You know, like I've gone over to, like, you know, Posty's place a couple times to play. Like I've played with, like, you know, Cassius and a bunch of stuff and everything. I've invited Jacob, at least, over to play at my place for the Commander Nights that we host here, but he's never made it. So he keeps telling me he will, and eventually he's gonna have to actually live up to his word there.
Yeah. Are you the kind of person that gets starstruck? Like, if you run into somebody, just
no,
it doesn't matter who they are. It could be like Robert De Niro. It doesn't matter.
I mean, I've just never really been someone who, like, is that, I don't know, that into celebrities, right? Like, I've never, like, met anyone who I'm just like, oh my god, I'm, like, too scared to, like, you know, like, walk up to them or something. I mean, I do have, like, you know, whatever level of just, like, human social anxiety to some extent. But I'm not like, you know, oh, I'm starstruck, I can't possibly, like, you know, speak to this person kind of thing.
Okay. So you're not like me before this interview, where I was just like,
well, like,
the wall is slowly dissolving. Like, I'm getting a little better now. Like, I'm feeling like, okay, Brian's actually a normal person. He's not actually a cyborg, like, out to get me. So jokes aside, like, I think it was like over a decade ago, you were actually the first Magic personality that I knew of. I'm not saying that I met you a decade ago, but I was like, back in the day, I still lived in Canada, and I still remember, like, going to my Magic LGS, and I hope this is not going to embarrass you. Like, the very first thing I ever saw that was, like, had a Magic personality on it was, like, that playmat of yours. Like, someone had the playmat in the LGS where you were like, you know the iconic Kibler playmat, and I think it was autographed. Is it like printed autograph, or did you hand autograph every one of those?
Anyone that's signed was just hand signed by me.
Yeah,
and unless someone, like, made, like, a stamp of my autograph or something and counterfeited them, I don't know, but.
And I remember it was a dude. It was a guy that had your playmat, and I was just like, this guy on the playmat must be so famous that somebody wants to get a Brian Kibler. I mean, I found out later it was Brian Kibler because I don't think it had your name on it, but it had your likeness. And I just asked the guy, like, who is that? Like, why do you have this playmat of like a pinup, like, you know, with
lounging on, like, a couch?
Yeah, like is that still available? That playmat is it still like a hot seller?
They've been like sold out of stock or whatever for many years. I've thought about making a new version, you know, with the new look.
Yeah.
I think I need to spend more time in the gym and do, like, a shirtless one or something, you know, to really up the ante for the next edition.
Wasn't there a Magic centerfold calendar? I think it was like there was one that Chapin or a few people did.
Chapin,
like,
organized a bunch of, like, Magic, you know, pros and personalities and such to do, like, a charity swimsuit calendar. This was like 2020. And yeah, I'm in that too.
Oh, geez. Okay, so I have to get the playmat, which is out of stock now. Maybe I can find it on eBay, right? And also this calendar.
I gotta... like, I have bins of playmats here, and I found actually a copy of that playmat, and then lost it somewhere in my house again. I was going to, like, because when Olivia did the fundraiser that she did for the National Abortion Fund, I was going to add that as a potential prize to her fundraiser. But then I found it and then lost it again somewhere, and I didn't want to commit to having that be a prize and then not be able to actually deliver it. So it's got to be somewhere in my office here, which is kind of a mess.
Okay.
You can maybe tell by looking like that way, as there's just boxes of stuff.
No, the wall looks really great, but I can just imagine now.
The camera looks nice. The other stuff.
Okay. So it's like just right outside the camera is just like stacks and stacks of Magic cards or whatever it is.
It's mostly like, well, there's an entire box of playmats. There's multiple, like, cases of sparkling water. There's just a sword, like an actual sword. There's Boffer LARP swords over here, but there's just an actual sword over there too.
Actual sword? Like, how did you get the actual sword? Like, is it for self-defense or what?
It's just like a, you know, from some person who made a sword online. Got a sword.
All right. So how many Brian Kibler playmats are there in your house then? Like, are there like hundreds or what?
No. I think I only know of like the one. There's another one that I had that got back at like PAX in like 2013, 14, something like that. Maybe even earlier. That I had like the whole like Dignitas League of Legends team sign. Back when it was like Scara, Cutie Pie, Crumbs, Kiwi Kid, and God, I'm blanking on who the other player was. Anyway, I have one.
That's
have
a
one
major
that
collector's item right there.
But then I had like a pristine one, like an unsigned, unblemished one as well, and I don't know where that is too.
Okay, so long weird tangent by me aside, like the reason why I mentioned this playmat is because like you do have a certain level of celebrity or Magic celebrity or just Brian Kibler celebrity. Like, what's the weirdest thing that someone has ever come up to you and said or asked you? Like, what's the weirdest interaction you've had with
I have been asked
fan?
to sign someone's prosthetic leg.
Okay.
I've been asked to sign a bag of dog food. It was kibbles and bits. So,
okay. On brand.
I had someone tell me that they had someone pretending to be me. That they like someone was like this girl that a friend of mine knew had some guy who was like hitting on her and pretending to be me. And I was like, she was like, I know this person.
You mean like they used your profile photo and like
no,
Tinder,
like in person. They like said they were me. And it's like this just seems like the sort of thing that's very easy to tell is not true.
Wait, you're saying this guy impersonating you actually knows you?
No, it was a friend of mine was talking to this girl who we had both met like at a convention. And she was at some other convention or something, and some guy was hitting on her pretending to be me.
How does that even work?
I don't know.
Like,
I don't.
If she accepts,
I don't know how you would think it
overtures.
But
like,
it definitely did not work. Like the thing about that is, if someone is going to possibly be impressed by someone pretending to be a person, they'd have to know who that person is and probably what they look like, right? Like, I just don't understand. But that happened.
That is actually incredible. Like this is like a Jerry Springer episode. Like, hey babe, I'm not actually Brian Kibler. Like I'm actually and my greatest gift is for impersonating people. Yeah, that is incredible. What is the question that you've been asked the most in interviews or publicly? Like what question are you absolutely tired of answering?
There's nothing that like really, I would say that I'm really like tired of answering. I mean, people ask like stuff like, "What's your favorite Magic card?" really often, but like, it's not like I'm like, sick of saying Knight of the Reliquary, because Knight of the Reliquary is awesome, and I will never stop extolling the virtues of Knight of the Reliquary.
Okay, so your favorite Magic card is like the most often asked question. Probably.
I mean. Yeah, most like favorite Magic card, favorite Hearthstone card, favorite deck, those sort of things are like very, very common questions.
Got it. Okay, I want to go back to not go back, but you showed me the sword, right? So I think it's fair game. Like, what's with LARPing? Like, how long have you been doing live action role playing? And give me the primer on what that's about.
Okay, so I actually first did live action role playing before I ever played Magic. I played my first live-action role-playing event when I was 12. I lied about my age. I turned 13 the next week. You had to be 13 to play. I told them I was 13. I just put my birthday down as the year before or whatever. But so live-action role-playing, like I played in a game back in New England when I was like that's where I grew up, and I played that same game through like another chapter they had in Atlanta where I went to college for like 10 years. And then I moved out to California and basically, didn't get involved in any kind of LARP stuff out here until like 2 years ago. But I got back into it through this game that has been running for like 10 years, which amusingly, I had met someone who played basically back when they started. When I was on an episode of Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory, they did like a LARP episode, and this was in like 2011. And the reason they did the LARP episode of Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory was because like Rob Dyrdek's like skateboard company was licensing the skateboard game that my old game company made. And they were like, well, we want to do a game episode, but like a board game episode would be boring, so we want to do a LARP episode. And I ended up going and being in that and being like the king who the Rob Dyrdek and his like party had to, find at the end of their whole adventure. And I gave them a flash drive that had the design of the game or whatever on it. It was this really goofy thing. But yeah, I met someone who was involved in the LARP that I now play like 10 years ago, and she was like, you should come try this game. And I'm like, nah, I live in San Diego. This is all the way up in LA. I'm going to pass. Yeah, 10 years later, I play the game.
Okay, so many things to unpack here.
There's a lot. I shared a lot of information.
Okay, first of all, you have to explain for a complete ignoramus or ignorant person like me, like, what does one do in LARP? Like, are you trying to, is there an actual, like, game engine or rules of engagement? Like, what's the objective? Or is it different depending on the session?
Yeah, so LARP is just live action role playing, right? And there are a variety of different kinds of like LARPs, right? There are what you people call parlor LARPs, where you basically like you have like there's a character in a story, and you're more or less doing like a live action like play, but you're not like fighting with like weapons or anything like that. It's like they have like maybe dice or like rock paper scissors or whatever that like resolve that kind of conflict. The games that I have played are boffer LARPs that you use foam swords, and you actually like hit people, in foam sword combat. And
shit, that's intense.
You'll have like, you'll have like a character, and your character has abilities, and you can use your abilities. Maybe they're combat related, maybe they're not. The game that I play now has, a lot of like. One of the things I think is really compelling about it is they have lots of ways for people who don't want to just basically play like a hack and slash dungeon crawl style character who's just like all about fighting or magic or whatever. There's lots of like crafting stuff and like political stuff and all this other sorts of ways that you can participate in and influence the world, especially if you're just like not a particularly physically apt person, right? You can still feel like you can be a part of this world and enjoy it, and not necessarily it be all about like, fighting all the time. That said, I like to fight a lot. I'm very good at LARP buffer combat.
Okay.
And
you like swinging the swords, getting physical. Yeah.
Yes. So this actually, let me show you something. This is actually a printout. Well, not a printout. It's like this is from the newsletter of the game. That's me. That's my character when I won the fighting tournament thing in the game that I play.
You are Tartan, the FP champion.
Yes. There's clearly me as a dragon because my character is a dragon.
Ah, okay. Okay. How did you come up with your character? Like, what's the inspiration there?
So the funny thing is, I literally was just like, well, the rule book for the game that I play is like quite extensive, and I was like, I want to play. I know from my time playing another LARP that I really like the combat aspect of it, and I was like, I basically just want an excuse to make a character that just like wants to fight. I found out you could be a dragon in the game. I'm like, well, I'm obviously going to be a dragon. That's my thing. So I was like, well, I'm going to be a dragon, and I'm going to be like a gladiator, someone who's like enslaved as a gladiator, so that like I have an excuse to have literally no other abilities than combat. And that was the whole of my original character concept.
Okay. Just the 2-sentence character bio. It's like
basically, yeah.
Like, okay. So Kartan is like, is he a berserker? Is that what it is, or
pretty
like
much?
Dragon?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's no dialogue like when you
there absolutely is.
In your
there's like
okay.
It's basically an interactive play, but like there's not like you don't have like lines. It's like an interactive improv story that you're interacting with, and you like maybe you run into like you spend a lot of your time just interacting with other players, right? And then maybe there's like monsters that you run into that you need to fight. There's like an ongoing storyline for like both within like an individual event, which is like a weekend long.
Right.
And also between events, there's like ongoing stuff that, like your character or like people in general maybe try to do.
Mm-hmm. Is there like a dungeon master or a referee? Like, are there campaigns? I'm trying to figure out the similarities to D&D, perhaps.
There are like people who run the game. There are staff who like like create the stories, who like adjudicate things if there's disagreements. I mean, the vast majority of everything that happens in the game is very much in the honor system. Like if you get hit with a weapon, when you swing your weapons, you like say what damage your weapon does. If you don't say anything, it does 1 damage. If you say something else, that's what it does. But like it's if you wanted to try and cheat, it's very, very easy to cheat. It's just stupid to cheat because it's just not fun. So
yeah. But having said that, are there cheaters in the LARP community?
There definitely are.
Oh, really? Like just dishonorable people or something?
Yeah, I mean, like in anything, people will do what they can to like, I don't know, try and gain advantages, or like, they feel that the rules don't apply to them. I mean, obviously seen much of that in competitive gaming and other aspects. Not that this is a competitive thing, but yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, how do your competitive juices kick in or not kick in when you're LARPing?
Sure.
Because you're trying to kill the other person, right? Even though it's make-believe.
So for me, there's a lot of various aspects of like live action role playing that I enjoy. There's, the performance aspect of it. I mean, obviously I spend most of every day of my life on camera, and, I obviously like the performance element of a lot of that. There's also like kind of the game element, like the game system element, right? Of like, here are the rules of this game. What are you going to do, to make a character, or to like, what sort of skills or abilities or items you want to get? All of that like has those juices flowing. And then there's the physicality of it. Like like I said, I played another LARP for like 10 years, and like I really, really enjoy, and I'm very good at like the actual combat part of it. And like that's a lot of where the sort of competitive element is like, I want to be the best at that. And like there's the sort of athleticism, physicality of like the actual, I don't know, art of buffer combat or whatever. And that's where that sort of feeds into the competitiveness. And it's not like, I'm like, trying to win. It's just that I want to be as good as I can at this. Got it.
Are there this buffer combat? Are there places like gyms where you could train, like, or do you just do it at home?
So the game that I play, there's a group of people who do like unofficial like fighting practice things at like a park every Saturday, and that's what, like, literally every Saturday morning. That's what I do because I love it so much.
Oh, word. Okay. That's
like I don't go out Friday nights basically because I gotta.
You gotta wake up on Saturday
at the park for my buffer combat.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Like, so what's the kind of demographic of people who play LARP in your area? Is it like?
I mean, it's really, really broad, right? Like, you have everything from like teenagers to like people in their like 50s or 60s. I mean, it's also Los Angeles, right? So you have a lot of people who are in, or at least adjacent to, the entertainment industry. There are people who like do prop fabrication for the game, who are professional prop fabricators in Hollywood, or like do costuming or makeup, who that is the industry that they work in, and they are very good at what they do. So there's some pretty incredible stuff that is involved in this game, sort of visually and storytelling wise. It's a lot of super talented people.
Do you have like any particularly memorable LARP moments, like or too many to count, maybe?
I mean, there's a lot, right? Like a lot of it's also like sort of things that like don't translate well to stories to people who don't have the context, right?
Okay.
Because it's like they aren't necessarily like the sort of things like, obviously winning like the fighting tournament things is fun, but like without the context of like, well, what does that even matter? Like, for instance, like that cutout or whatever is from when I won like this fighting tournament where they did like brackets based on like how many games you had played as your character. And I had only played 3 games and ended up winning the entire thing over like people who'd played like 8 or 9 or 10 games, just because Brian is very good at this. Not that my character was particularly necessarily a powerful character, although now it's both, and I'm just gonna beat everyone. So.
What's
Ellie has decided to grace us with her presence.
Ellie, you said?
This is Elspeth, aka
Elspeth.
Ellie.
Okay. How long have you had Ellie for?
We have had Ellie and her brother Oko for 2 months now.
Okay. Okay. Are they I mean, other than making lots of noise, like are they just like are they good to have around? Like
Oh,
are like
no, I love them. They are wonderful.
yeah.
Ellie is the louder of the two. She is the guardian. That's thus Elspeth.
So she was the one that was barking.
Usually when there's barking around here, it's Ellie. Yeah.
Okay.
Oko's
Okay.
the himbo who just wants pets from everyone. He just lays around with his belly out, much like Oko, and
Yeah.
just wants attention. She's the one who's always on guard, always alert.
How long have you been a dog person for?
I've loved animals like my whole life. There's actually like a long period where I like wanted to like get a dog when I was like either like right out of college or whatever, but just didn't like make sense because I was traveling so much for Magic. But since that's not really a thing that is part of my life anymore, at least in the same way. It's not like I'm traveling every weekend for a tournament like I was back in like 2012 or whatever. It's just nice to have the little fellows around.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just recently became a pet owner. I'm more on the cat side, but I've never had any pets my whole life. I thought it was just too much work, and then I think it was like 2 years ago, my wife just said, we're gonna get a cat." And then now I'm just madly in love with. I think our cats are like scratching the door. The good thing is that they don't bark, so it's easier for recordings. But I just can't imagine like life without cats now. Like I've become. Like I go to business school part time, and basically my classmates now know me as like James the Catman, because like whenever there's a call, like a Zoom call or something, my cats are always like. Today they are not, but they're usually crawling around and like trying to draw attention. I feel like they're like little dogs. I think maybe it's because the way we raised them, like we really pampered them, so it's like they're really starving for attention, which is not the stereotypical cat. But anyways, that's a big tangent. I know you're more of a dog person, right? Less of a cat person.
So I actually, when I grew up, like my brother wanted to get a dog, and I think like kind of as a contrarian, I was like, well, I want to get a cat, kind of how sibling relationships can be. And then, we got a dog and a cat, and I like the dog more. So
just stuck with the dog.
I learned that I liked dogs better, but
in light of everything you told me today, like for example, EDH Commander and things like that, like how would you describe your current relationship with Magic?
I mean, I still love Magic, and I want to see Magic and also competitive Magic succeed. I am not interested in having the kind of relationship that I had with Magic, 10 years ago, where it was my life, but like when the Pro Tours, come back next year or whatever, is my understanding is they're going to start doing those. Because I'm in the Hall of Fame, I'm invited to one of them a year, so I'm very likely going to compete in the event, like at least one event a year that I'm automatically qualified for, and I'll I won't be like treating it like a job like I did again 10 years ago or whatever, but I'm going to try and win. But yeah, I mean, I really, really love Magic, and it's, probably the most formative thing in my entire life. It's the reason that I have the kind of jobs that I've had throughout my life. And, it's obviously changed a lot over the years, but, I still, I'm still happily involved in it, at least just in a different way.
How do you feel about the new Pro Tour system?
I don't really know that much about it at this point. They haven't really.
That's a common answer.
Really, like, given us tons of information. Just like there will be.
Is that Elspeth again?
Ellie's not happy about the Pro Tour. Apparently,
she's voicing dissent right there.
Yeah. But no, I mean, like there isn't like. I feel like it was a mistake for Wizards to like upend as much history and tradition as they had with the Pro Tour and kind of try to like reinvent the wheel, essentially. Like the Magic Pro Tour was the longest ongoing competitive gaming circuit that I'm aware of ever. Like, with the exception of like, I don't know, probably like chess or whatever, but like in sort of the like esports-ish gaming world, like Magic was kind of like the like first real like pro gaming scene that like, had like a level of legitimacy. And I feel like, the desire to like, become esports or whatever and shift over to being like a more broadcast focused product, and rebrand things to Mythic Championships or whatever, I feel like was just an error, because I feel like if you wanted to do something like the Pro League on top of the Pro Tour, have like this additional level of competition or something, that's one thing, right? But completely like doing away with as many years of like tradition and as many years of history as you had, I think just ended up really undermining like the legitimacy that a lot of people viewed the competitive circuit to have. And I think that it was great for the people who were able to take advantage of the sheer amount of money they threw at stuff like MPL over the time that they did. But I think it clearly missed the mark on what people cared about as far as like what competitive Magic is. Because I think that what people care about are, the sense of legitimacy, the sense that like, hey, I'm doing something that is part of this bigger system that matters. It has like this historical precedent. It has, this like rich history. And, even if it wasn't like something that was, you're going to become like rich and famous off of, it was something that like you could at least justify the amount of time and money that you spent like, practicing and preparing for these sort of events. And, I was certainly a very vocal person about how that latter part at least wasn't true, as they kept sort of expanding and doing more and more Grand Prix and having like, players feel the need to travel to like all of these in order to like stay competitive in like the pro player and world championship races and things. And ultimately, like, that was why I stopped competing, was I was just sick of feeling like I had to always be playing and stuff. And not just that, but like always traveling to things. And, if like, it weren't like, going to like a tournament every other weekend, I might have just kept playing, right? Like if it wasn't like, the need to constantly be like traveling to all these events and competing. People didn't care that much about watching the best players play. People cared about watching the best players play, but they cared more about the chance of playing against them or seeing their friends play against them. Of the aspirational part of it, not like the like awe of it, right? Because one of the things that like differentiates Magic from, say, League of Legends or shooters or basketball or whatever, right? The average person watching the best person in the world play doesn't even know why they're that good, right? Like you can watch like like the best basketball players in the world play, and you don't even have to understand really the rules of basketball, and you're like, holy shit, that was incredible, right? Like you just see people doing these crazy things. You watch like a shooter and you see someone make like a crazy shot. All of this is like very easily grokkable by the average person just watching, and especially someone who has like a reasonable amount of knowledge about the game. You have to be incredibly tuned in to have any idea like what makes like a John Finkel so great at Magic, or Apollo so great at Magic. And like just watching that person play against someone else who's also very good, you also like lose like because these play like the amount of like frankly luck that does go into, especially like people who are that close in skill level among the best players. It's like, okay, you just have these people like yes, they're obviously very very like important decisions that happen in all these games, but you basically have like, okay, well, did you get a good match for a bad matchup against the other really good player? Did you get good or bad against the other really good player? And it's just kind of this back and forth of this. And obviously, yes, there are tiers of this and differences in play skill and how people perform. But a lot of that's invisible to the audience, and like it's just not that interesting compared to, hey, my buddy's at the Grand Prix playing against Kai Buddha or whatever, right? Like that is so much more compelling to the average person than just watching the same people play the same decks over and over, week in and week out.
I know you used to play poker, so I think it's best to kind of invoke the moneymaker effect, right? Because the idea of the World Series of Poker, or poker having its heyday, and I would argue it still does, right? With some of the recent stuff that's come out in the news about poker and etc. Always, but controversies, right? But like it's the fact that you feel like you could be the next Chris Moneymaker, right? It's the fact that you can like sit next to Brian Kibler or sit next to Kai Bude and actually play them instead of it being kind of like a closed loop system, which is what the MPL is, right? Which is like more like basketball, but then I think Magic is also a double-edged sword, as you kind of alluded to, is that it's harder to just appreciate that, especially when the two people are very high-level players. So it's like you need commentary, you need like a deep understanding of the game
and
to
frankly,
begin with to actually even grok that.
Yeah, and frankly, like most commentators can't even really explain what makes, and this isn't really like necessarily a dig at like, any of the people who do commentary, right? But like, you have to be like among the absolute best to be able to like walk through these players' thought processes, like it is a very, very hard game to do commentary for. And, I feel like the commentary is crucial, but it also like, even with that, it is difficult to be able to present it in, a way that really allows the audience to appreciate just how good these players can be. And, that's why I just feel like that, like, the best versus the best, while it's obviously something that is great narratively, it being the only thing you're doing when you're doing essentially like the MPL as your primary product for broadcast and getting rid of stuff like Grand Prix, or at least getting rid of the broadcasting of Grand Prix, that was so much more compelling to the average person, right? Like they want to see their friend making a deep run at the Grand Prix or at the Pro Tour or whatever. Or like be able to envision themselves in this situation playing against, like a Luis Scott Vargas or whatever. That is, I think, much more compelling to the audience than, the 80th match between like, Luis Salvato and like Seth Manfield or whatever. It's just like, it's just not that compelling over the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you feel that competitive play or organized play in Magic is going the right step in the legitimate direction?
I think that the move away from MPL and the move back toward doing, qualifiers into Pro Tours is the right direction to go. I think that they had the system more or less right before. And, I think that there's obvious ways things can be improved, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that, we have seen that people don't want, stuff like the MPL. And we saw the same thing in Hearthstone, right? It's not like it's specifically something that is, a condition of like Magic. It's more like, like the idea of going to like a broadcast first product rather than a participation first product was something that both of those games did at basically the same time. My understanding is that there was like crossover between people who went between the two different companies. So there was like cross-pollination of ideas, which unsurprisingly led to both, both games doing very similar things with their organized play and making the same mistakes, frankly.
It feels like things have kind of gone in from one extreme to the other. So my understanding of the new Pro Tour system is that there's not really going to be all that much coverage, or at least so far, I haven't seen like PTQs being broadcast, right? Or maybe regionals or higher level events will be. But like, how do you feel about that, though?
I mean, I feel like it's weird because it is expensive to do quality broadcast of live events, right? Like, and it doesn't necessarily make sense for these sort of third parties to do it. It only makes sense if it is viewed by, like Wizards or by, the whatever organizer for like these large scale things, to do them, right? Like, because, especially at like large convention centers, like the amount that it costs just for internet, like particularly internet that can actually do that level of bandwidth for streaming is like way more than like most people reasonably comprehend when they talk about like, why don't they just have coverage, right? And, but I do think that like having stuff like your Pro Tour level events, your regional championship level events, having coverage for those, I think is a very valuable thing to making people feel like playing the game matters, right? Like, and maybe, Wizards has made sort of the decision with the success of Commander, without any sort of live events over, the course of like quarantine, COVID and such. They're like, well, we're selling more product than ever. So we're not spending, all this money on, the marketing expense of the Pro Tour and of Grand Prix and coverage and things like that. So why bother going back to it? It, could be the mentality that you have. But at the same time, I think that there is like some population of your player base who's sort of like been waiting to get back to playing competitively, and they're like kind of hungering for these sort of announcements. And I feel like the legitimacy, like I talked about before, with what the Pro Tour offers, is making it feel like what you're doing matters, and the time you're spending isn't just like wasted on this hobby. And particularly given just how expensive Magic is too, right? It's not just time; it's money. And there being something which is like, this is the goal, right? And the goal doesn't have to be that I am competing in the World Championship. The goal can just be like, I'm getting a feature match on camera at a big tournament, and that makes me feel like all this time was worth it, right? Like, that's the goal I will have, is to just like be recognized, be noticed, be seen in the community. And that's totally understandable. We basically live in like an attention economy. So getting any of that attention, is something that people feel like legitimized by. So I hope that they do have at least some degree of coverage for these events that isn't just, like people like webcamming in from home and, just MTG Arena stuff, because I think that we've seen that isn't nearly as compelling as live stuff.
For sure. Let's say that there was a counterfactual example where, let's say that it was like 20-year-old you, right? Because at that time you were like aspiring to get on the highest ranks, or you were wanting to go as far as you could competitively in Magic. If 20-year-old Brian were like teleported into the present world, let's just say that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how would someone who's like ultra competitive or has those aspirations, like how should they look at Magic? Is Magic even worth quote unquote doing in your opinion?
I don't know.
Or someone like that.
Honestly, I don't know if the like competitive offerings that Magic has now would be something that I would be willing to spend anything close to like the time that I spent when I was that age. Like, certainly like right now, no, because there aren't like the kind of tournaments, the level of competition that existed then. I am hopeful that when they do like relaunch, the Pro Tour, as they've said, like early next year, that we will see, that like level of competition and that feeling of legitimacy to spending that time to be competitive in Magic mattering again and feeling like it's worth it. I mean, we do have like the World Championship coming up at Magic 30, right? The funny thing is, I know so little about that, right? Like it feels so strange that like I have no idea who's qualified for the World Championship. It's in 2 weeks. Right. And it's not to say that like I'm someone who is like super dialed into the Magic competitive scene, but it's strange to me that like I haven't even heard anything about it other than it's happening. I don't know what formats it is. I don't know who's playing. Like it is bizarre to me that I follow every Magic social media account and I haven't seen promotion of this. Right. Like and some of this is the actual like OP systems, and some of it is just like those kind of choices. Right? Like, what are the priorities? Are you spending your social media resources promoting all the new secret layers, but not this? So, like some of it is that like back when, in 2000 or whatever, when I was 20, which is so strange, but back then, like there were so many different like Magic websites and, like there was like the Sideboard magazine, there was all this stuff, and obviously this is a pre-social media age, so it is like very different because you just have less sort of things immediately thrown in your attention. You do have to go seek these things out, but it felt like there was more ability to see stuff about this than there is now to a certain extent, or at least there are more places that seemed to care. It's certainly pretty demoralizing as someone who, wants to care about competitive Magic, that like all of the major like retailers and websites that used to focus largely on competitive play in terms of articles and videos and things like that just don't anymore. Like Star City, Channel Fireball, like, used to have like basically like an arms race for like, the like top players for getting strategy articles and videos and things like that. And now, like, you just have more Commander videos forever, right? Not that there's anything like, wrong with that, but like, I think it's a combination of factors of like the specific decisions made with things like the MPL. Obviously, COVID was huge in terms of the impact that it had on Magic competitive play, which historically has been focused in paper play, and had like they kind of shifted some amount of focus to MTG Arena, particularly through MPL and like the Mythic Invitationals or whatever. But they hadn't fully pivoted to digital in any way, and then kind of had to immediately, and didn't really have like the structure to get that quite figured out immediately. But that also obviously had the impact of, well, no one's buying cards to play in tournaments, so you don't have like the value of writing a strategy article, as a third party retailer like a Star City or whatever. Why pay for a strategy article when no one's going to buy a deck to play in a tournament, right? And that hasn't changed even since like stuff has opened up, after sort of the at least major elements of like COVID quarantine have largely lifted, but there just still aren't like big tournaments that people are like really bothering to, put decks together and play in, other than, the like stuff on Magic Arena or whatever. And that's like, well, you're not selling anyone cards as a third party retailer for that. So
do you think Magic is too entrenched in the way that it's going for there to like have any major significant like 180 changes? Because you're kind of touching on like the fact that there were some missteps along the way. I think it's sort of like universally agreed upon, and kind of understanding that Wizards and Magic is a kind of big machine. It's very hard to like make a course correction. So I'm wondering, like, is it just going to keep going down the path of what it's doing now, which is like catering to more like non-competitive, a more non-competitive demographic? Or do you think there's actually a way that we could fork it so that it could, like, all parties could be satisfied?
So I think it's actually correct for Magic to focus more on less competitive players, because there's more of them, right? Like making stuff for people who are playing Commander, making stuff for just playing like kitchen table type Magic is frankly probably the position that Magic should have taken more of for a longer time, right? Like competitive Magic kind of was the shining star of like Magic broadly for a very long time, like at least in terms of the attention that it got, even when that wasn't necessarily justified by like who actually bought cards, like you sold far more cards to like people who were just putting together like their sliver deck than were playing in like, a tournament or whatever. So, I think that some of that was just kind of a natural correction that was ultimately going to happen, but was obviously hurried along by the various missteps made by Magic Organized Play alongside, everything shutting down with COVID. I am hopeful that, with the relaunch of the Pro Tour, William Jensen being the person who's like, the director of those programs now is something that makes me feel a lot better about it, because he's obviously someone who has a lot of experience on the player side, and a lot of insight into what people do care about as competitive players, and not just sort of like someone who is coming from, like a marketing perspective, who's like, hey, we want to, rebrand this and make it something, that is, I don't know, punchier or whatever with the Mythic Championship. It's like, what? I honestly think that renaming was one of the worst parts about the whole thing, because it's just, you just have so many years of history of the Pro Tour, and then you're just like, we're just going to call this the Mythic Championship. It's like, is that because your deck has to be all Mythic rares? I don't understand. Mythic's a cool word. Give me my legitimacy. That really is the biggest thing. Is it?
I thought Ellie was objecting to the naming of the Mythic Championship, so.
They're barking like crazy. Give me one sound. Nope, doesn't look like you sound. Come here. Oko, I'm trying to give you a treat and pick you up. Wow, he just scampered away.
I was hoping for Oko's appearance on camera.
Oko, come here. Wow, he's just walking away. It's very unlike him to not want pets, to not want.
Oh, really? It must be my voice. It's like, he is really deterring him. I think what's really interesting is that you have said in the past that when you worked on a game like Versus System, it was almost like the opposite of casual. Like it was entirely skill based, and like the person who was better would win like all the time. And you actually said, I think, that that's one of the reasons the game didn't work, because it didn't really have that mass appeal. It wasn't like as fun for like a more fun-loving or larger crowd. I'm just wondering, in light of that observation, like, do you think Magic has the right balance of casual/fun versus something else today? Yeah, it's just how you feel about that balance.
I do think that you know, the sort of product offerings and direction that Magic is going makes a lot more sense with that, you know, greater focus on the ways that people actually do enjoy playing the game, like Commander, you know, rather than just being sort of as focused as they historically have been on competitive play. And yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that you see often with like game companies that like decide they want to make a card game, right, is you see them hire people who were previously competitive players in other card games, and then they end up with a game that those players want to play. And it's not necessarily a game that anyone else wants to play, you know? And I think that was one of the things that happened with Versus System. You had, you know, Upper Deck hiring a bunch of like former pro Magic players, and then you end up making a game that those players want to play, and often that no one else wants to play. And you've seen this in a lot of card games, right? You know, especially early on when companies are trying to make games that are like competitors to Magic, they're like, well, we're going to make a game that you can't get mana screwed, that doesn't have as much luck, doesn't have as much randomness. It's like, well, that just makes the game less fun, right? Like, a lot of people complain about elements of randomness in games, but the reality is that those elements of randomness are often what make the games both just like generally fun, because there's more elements of surprise. It's not just like, I figured out the math and thus I win, but also like it is a reason for players who might not necessarily be the best players to keep playing, because sometimes they win, right? Like if Magic didn't have a lot of the elements of randomness that it does have, or if Hearthstone didn't have a lot of the elements of randomness that it does have, I don't think either of them would be nearly as successful. A lot of people like look at and frame, you know, oh, we want to fix this element of this game, like fix the randomness in Magic or fix the randomness in Hearthstone. It's like, no, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. Because you're just going to end up with, you know, a game that literally like the 5 best players of that game love playing, and no one else likes to play because they always lose to them. And, you know, it's not even necessarily just that sort of like, you know, how likely you are to win depending on, you know, like how good of a player you are. It's just like the gameplay ends up being super similar and repetitive if you just don't have elements of randomness in a lot of cases. I think that's just something that people view as a negative when it's actually like exactly the opposite. It's a huge reason for the success of a lot of these games.
How did you come to that realization? Oh, no problem. How did you come to this realization? Was it through your career in game design? Was it just through like living life? Was it through Hearthstone? Like, how did you come up with that sort of insight?
I don't think it's like a unique observation, you know, when it comes to games and randomness. You know, I think that like some of it is you know, you just kind of play these games that like, you know, have more elements of like control for the player, like Versus System, for instance. Versus System, you know, that was the first game that I ever worked on, and I worked on it after winning their first like pro circuit tournament, their first pro tour, effectively. I went to go work at Upper Deck on the game, and like Versus System was super hard, right? Like it was a superhero card game, but like the way the game works is like you played out your heroes, and like you had like resources each turn, and like they didn't want you to be able to get mana screwed, so you could play any card as a resource, but you wanted to have better cards to play as a resource, so you wouldn't just feel bad always playing things down, like, face down, so you could have plot twists. And you played your plot twists face down, and you could flip them face up and use them after you use them as a resource. So you just end up with these situations where you have like 6 face down cards, any of which could be any number of things, and then like, you know, this positioning of your hero cards, your creature cards, whatever, that is all super important because the way that you attack and position them based on like whether they can reinforce and prevent basically trample damage. And it's just like mind crushing, right? The number of permutations of what can possibly happen in any given like combat based on how you position things and what the possible face down things are. And it's like, okay, you got rid of some of the element of randomness by like not being able to be mana screwed, but now you've just like made it so that there's just way too many things to like compute for the average person. And you know, you make it such that like like the game is not about like superheroes battling, right? It's about like just a bunch of math and probabilities. And it's like
it's math disguised in a superhero theme game, right?
Yeah, it's just not gonna be the sort of thing that appeals to like the average comic book fan, right? You want to have like your heroes battling, rah, like, you know, who wins in a fight, Thing versus the Hulk or whatever, right? And like it wasn't that. It was like, you know, oh, I positioned my guy here when he should have been here, and thus I took one more point of damage and I died. And it just wasn't really something that like ever took off with a more casual audience. And it was launched with a Pro Tour, you know, thus me winning the first Pro Tour or whatever. It was launched with a Pro Tour to clearly intend to appeal to like this very competitive audience, without sort of the realization that that audience is already like a small subsection of the audience of like the game you're trying to pull over, right? If you're trying to attract competitive Magic players, you know, you're already going to get like a smaller slice of a smaller pie, and then like, you know, you kind of have to keep them. And it's like, well, what are you going to keep them with? Like just offering them even more prizes or whatever? Like if you just get people who are mercenaries to your game because you have a lot of prizes, that's all they're going to be. So
what attracted you to Versus? Was it the prize pool, or is it just because they were exactly the demographic?
First prize for their tournament, and no one was good at the game, so I just won.
Okay. I mean, another counterfactual. Like, is that the kind of game that you would even consider touching today, or it's just so? I mean, like let's say adjusted for inflation, the prize pool was like whatever 2022 equivalent was. Like, would you go back there?
I mean, yeah, I'd give it a shot. You know, like I did like playing the game at first, right? Like because it was new and it was like a new challenge to figure out, right? There's obviously just that appeal of like any new game that comes out. It's like, hey, I want to try and figure this out, right? Like that. There's something that's inherently fun to that initial challenge. It's kind of like what I was talking about before, like the challenge of like figuring out deck building is the thing that keeps me coming back to like Magic or Hearthstone or whatever, right? And you know, like figuring out like the systems of a new game and how to actually be good at the game and you know how to like, you know, be able to win when it is clear that my goal is to be competitive because there's this big prize tournament, right? So, you know, there is definitely that appeal. But for instance, like I played like Artifact when that came out, right? And despite the fact that there was like this huge prize pool for Artifact, I was just like, I don't want to play this. This is just like mind-numbingly like, you know, overwhelming in terms of just there being too many things going on all the time, and it just wasn't fun to me. So, you know, like even despite the fact that they announced they were gonna have like $1 million first prize tournament, I was just like, I'm not gonna play this. And then the game died before they ever had that tournament because it was way too hard.
Yeah. When you were in the top ranks of the Pro Tour, and you there was basically a progression system that allowed you to reach the highest levels and then to enter the Hall of Fame. Because I understand you took a break from Magic and you came back to get into the Hall of Fame. Does such a thing exist now in Magic or games that you're aware of? Like, is there something? Because I feel like Magic was sort of hit this sweet spot where it actually, the legacy of your career actually mattered. Are there any games today that kind of still hit that mark, or is it only about prize pools and like other things now?
I mean, I think that there are games that have like the level of like legitimacy just in terms of achievements that it feels like, wow, you know, like that's really impressive. Like for instance, like League of Legends. I'm not good at League of Legends. You know, I like, you know, just don't think that I'll ever be that good at League of Legends. My hands just don't move fast enough or whatever. But like, you know, players who have their sort of careers and like championships and like MVP type awards and things like that. You know, like I don't even know what the prize pools are for like the League of Legends World Championship. It's not about that, right? It's about like, you know, the legitimacy of winning, right? And that's you know, like that I think in a lot of ways is much more motivating than like the money to a lot of people. Like I remember when I was competing in Magic, and there was like the invitational, right? When you had the chance to win and be featured on a card. And I would have much rather won that than a Pro Tour, because it was like this way of just being cemented in the history of the game in a way that, like, you know, yes, obviously it's great to win a Pro Tour and win like $40,000, which was the prize pool, like, you know, back then. But like, to be like immortalized in the game's history kind of thing was just way cooler to me. Even before I'd won a Pro Tour, and even when I was a pro college kid, right? I was just like, yeah, this is way cooler. So, I don't think it's just all about prize pool. I think it's about, like I was saying before, feeling like it matters, right? Feeling like, the amount of time and energy that you spend at this game is something that like you can look back in the future and be like, I'm proud of that. I'm happy I did that. And you can spend the money, right? The money's going to go away, especially when you're a broke college student and you win a bunch of money for the first time and then you just buy everyone drinks. But so funny story. My first big tournament success on the Pro Tour, I got third place at Pro Tour Chicago in 2000. I was a college student at the time. And I had quit my work study in the theater. I built sets in the theater as part of my work study. And I was like, this is taking up too much of my time. I need to spend more time preparing for these tournaments that I'm playing in. And I got third place in the Pro Tour and I won $15,000. And I deposited the check and my bank account was $15,025. And I kept that ATM receipt for so long. Yeah. It was worn out to pieces in my wallet. I kept it forever, just kind of as this, this acknowledgement of, where I had come from and where this had sort of started. And also just what a crazy person I was for flying to this tournament in Chicago as a broke college student with $15 in my bank account and no other possible recourse if I did not do well.
So, in sports, they say that someone is irrationally confident if they're the 12th man on an NBA team and they get into the game and they're still shooting every shot as if they're Michael Jordan. Where do you think you got your irrational confidence from?
I don't know. I just think, I don't even know that it was necessarily that degree of confidence. I think it was just well, this is what I want to do. And I want to spend my time doing this. And it wasn't even necessarily that it was I was so sure that it was going to go well. It was just that I needed it to, right? I really, really wanted it to. And that tournament was particularly weird because there were so many moments in that tournament where I was just I am going to draw this card. And I just did, right? This almost just Yugi heart of the card,
the universal line,
the card
right?
at the top of my deck, kind of nonsense. Yeah. It's almost what it felt like, right? And in order to do well, in order to win any tournament that involves drawing cards from a deck, you've got to get lucky to some extent, right? But it felt almost supernatural at some points during that tournament. Some serious main character syndrome going on there.
Looking back, how do you feel about your Magic career? Are you 100% happy with your legacy, or do you have any regrets?
I'm happy with it. I obviously would I love to have won more? Sure, but I don't feel like I needed to. I don't feel like I had anything to prove, which wasn't true before I came back and started playing again. Right, when they announced the Hall of Fame. At that time, I just had that one top 8, right? I had that one top 8 from Chicago. I'd won 2 Grand Prix at that time. But I only had the one top 8, and I knew that I wouldn't legitimately be voted into the Hall of Fame with that level of results. And I kind of had made the decision. I was this is something that was very important to me through so much of my life. I want to be in the Hall of Fame. I am going to prove that I deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, and started playing again. And, I think it took me something 7 PTQs or something like that. Might have even been more than that. I don't even remember exactly, but it was a good chunk of PTQs that I played in before I won one. But then I won a PTQ for Honolulu, and then I made top 8 in Honolulu and won Austin, back to back. So I was okay. Well, I think I may have proved my point. And then, obviously, went on to win Honolulu again in 2012. I guess not again, because I didn't win the previous Honolulu. But yeah, there were definitely periods when I was competing that I wasn't my goal was not necessarily like, hey, I'm trying to be the best for a lot of like my early time playing the Pro Tour. I was a college student. I was enjoying traveling around and playing in tournaments and having a good time, right? Like it wasn't like my priority to like be the absolute best that I could be and to try and like necessarily do as well as I could in all of these tournaments. But once I decided like, hey, I want to prove that I'm as good as I think I am, right? And I want other people to believe that too, then I just kind of started winning stuff again.
How does your mind work? Like when you came back to try
I wish I knew.
No. Like when you came back and tried to cement your place in the Hall of Fame, was there a lot of pressure that you put on yourself? Like in terms of, or was it just became like a confidence thing where you just knew you could do it, and even playing like 7 PTQs or whatever you had to do to grind through it, you knew you could?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just knew that I could. Like I think that like I just felt like I knew that when I had competed before and I hadn't done as well as I knew that I could have, it was because of just the way that I was focusing on other things and not necessarily, focusing on the game as well. One of the things that was always really rough for me, like earlier in my competitive career, was I was very bad at staying focused, like toward the like end of a tournament. Like as soon as I started doing like, as soon as I like, took a loss, like late in a tournament that might like knock me out of like top 8 contention, I would just collapse, right? Like I had like so few results that weren't like great or awful. And it was
like you just weren't interested if you were out of like the top.
It was because I just like
8.
I just like let myself lose focus when I was no longer like competing to win anymore, right? It was difficult for me to like care that much about getting like top 32 or whatever. It just wasn't something that like I cared enough about to like have as much focus, because I just really wanted to win. And I would easily let myself get distracted by like, oh, if I win this one, then I just need to win one more. And I wasn't just focusing on the game, I was focusing on like what the implications of the game were for the rest of the tournament kind of thing. And that would distract me, lead me to like often make some sort of mistake, and then leave me in a position where like, okay, well now I can't make top 8, so I don't really care that much anymore.
So is that something that you corrected in yourself, like when you came back to Magic? Then you're like playing every round as if it.
When I stopped playing, I stopped competing for like 5 or 6 years. I just had better just like life perspective. It's going from being like a college kid to being someone who had like spent a bunch of time. I wouldn't say out in the real world, because I just worked in game design, which is not entirely the real world. But had like a different perspective on the game. And I like, while I did feel like I had something to prove, it was more like I had something to prove to myself than anyone else. And I think that like, I didn't feel like, I needed to, I just wasn't as caught up in my results. I was more just like playing the game, which is particularly weird because the whole point, to some extent of me competing again was that I wanted to prove to everyone else that I should be in the Hall of Fame. But that wasn't kind of how my mindset was in the tournaments. It was like I was able to focus better because it was, I think part of it was being like away from the scene for a while gave me perspective that like this isn't just the only thing that matters in my life, right? Which it kind of was when I was competing initially, when I was just out of college. Like competing in Magic was kind of the only thing that I knew, the only thing that I'd done. So I didn't have the level of just like life perspective to keep the sort of implications of, whatever game or round or tournament, in mind, and be able to keep myself steady through it.
What did you say in your Hall of Fame speech? Because I tried my best. I could not find. They didn't have the speech in 2010.
I don't remember. I don't know when they started doing Hall of Fame speeches, but it wasn't a thing when I was inducted.
Okay, because I do remember reading about the coverage, and like you thanked your family, particularly your mom, for like getting you to where you were and all that stuff. I wasn't sure if there was a speech. So.
Yeah, they did like a brief interview, like after the ceremony, I think, but they didn't do like a speech or anything.
That's unfortunate. You need to, for someone like who's so well spoken, they need to have you like do a speech. Like is I don't know. Okay. One last question for you. This is going to be like super random, but I heard this from Reed Duke, so I thought I would just shoot my shot. Sure. Like, what's the story with the college admission letter? What?
Oh, You mean the Harvard one?
I don't know. Like Reed
Okay.
just said, ask Brian about the college
Okay,
admission.
sure. So, when I was a senior in high school, I went to Phillips Academy in Andover. It's like a very prestigious like prep school, whatever. I was a scholarship kid, and but like there was a lot of people there who apply to like all the Ivy Leagues, like Harvard, Yale, etc. So my senior year, I had applied to a number of schools, including Harvard, and I got my my letter, from Harvard, which was a rejection letter, but it was dated April 1st, and I wrote back to Harvard. I sent like a reply to the admissions office that was like, I appreciate. I don't actually have that letter. I don't remember the exact words, but it was basically something that just was, I appreciate your joke in the spirit of April Fool's Day, but you can feel free to send me my actual letter of acceptance at your earliest convenience. And this, like, because there were like so many people they're very excited about it.
Yeah.
Because there were so many people like at my school that like applied to Harvard, this kind of like became like a folk kind of like legend among my class, whatever. But they wrote back to me, and were like, oh, like I actually still have this letter somewhere from them that was like, like the April 1st has no like folk significance in this office, like good luck in your future endeavors, but this has to be considered, like, take it seriously or whatever. And I wrote back to them again. And like highlighted the fact that like there was a typo in April 1st. It was like 1 STT. And I was like, I can clearly see that this is just, an attempt to make sure that any applicant who you admit to your university has the utmost attention to detail. And they wrote me back again. It was like, it was just like a handwritten letter that was like, I'm a generalist, typos are part of my style or whatever. But this came up recently because a reporter like tweeted about this story, and the reporter was the sister of one of the guys who lived in my dorm at Andover, and she'd heard the story from him, and I'm like, yeah, that was me. She like, there's some ongoing thing about college admissions, and she was like, I heard the story about this, and I'm like, yes, that story you heard was about me.
So how did you decide? So you did get accepted into Harvard?
I did not. No.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. You did. You ended up going to college in Atlanta.
But my like back and forth April Fool's related messages did not change their mind.
That's unfortunate.
I don't know.
So yeah, Brian,
it worked out pretty well for me. So
yeah. I think they did. Brian, thank you so much. You were absolutely lovely. Thank you for taking the time. I'm still a little bit nervous, but thank you for keeping me entertained and honest.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.